So I think the 4% withdrawal rate is way too conservative. And in this video, I'm going to tell you the reason why I believe that, and also the withdrawal rate that I'm going to be using personally myself. So the inspiration for this video, if you like, was born from listening to a lot of people in the FIRE movement who had achieved financial independence. And a lot of them had built up substantial pots and used that 4% withdrawal rate as the kind of golden rule about how much you can draw down from your pot. But the more I looked into that and the more I found is that most of the people in that movement went on to increase their net worth significantly, sometimes over double over a short period of time. So what I mean by that, a lot of people retired when they had 500,000 or £1 million or whatever, and they very soon ended up with double that, and they almost had more money than what they knew what to do with. And I'm a big fan of the book by Bill Perkins, Die with Zero. I don't want to be the richest person in the graveyard. So I'm a big believer in trying to use my money as effectively as possible to have the best life possible for myself, for my family, and for everyone around with me. And it dawned up on me that that 4% withdrawal rate is pretty bulletproof. You know, it works in something like 99% of cases over a 30-year period. And it started me down the rabbit hole of finding out what potentially I could use instead. But also using or mitigating a more aggressive withdrawal rate with the sequence of return risks. There's a few things I'm going to be doing which will allow me to have a much bigger withdrawal rate. So the first thing is that sequence of withdrawal risk. So what I'm not going to do is retire when the market's down. That is the biggest risk for most people, when you draw down on your pot in a downturn. Now, I know we can't predict the future, but I also don't have to make the jump immediately if the market is down when I'm intending to do so. So if I decide I'm going to retire in 5 years, and it just so happens that at that period the market's down significantly, then I hopefully, you know, all being well, I will just extend my work for a little bit of a prolonged period. And that's the beauty, and I think the flexibility we have with early retirement. Not that I'm necessarily going to retire, it's just more financial independence for me, but I also have the option to continue working if the market is down. So rather than just saying, right, at 45, that's it, I'm pulling the plug, I'm getting out of work. If the market's significantly down, I'll just work a little bit longer, and that might take 6 months, it might take 12 months, it might take 2 years. But you know, that's only going to take me up to 47. Worst case scenario, we have one of the biggest downturns in history, and I might have to work for a further 5 years until things turn round. But what I am very confident of, that it will eventually turn round. If it doesn't, you know, we've got very big problems, far bigger than what date I can retire early. So that's the first thing I've got in my favor. I've got the flexibility and I've got time on my side. You know, if you're 57, 67 and you need to retire at that age, you don't necessarily have that flexibility. So that's the good thing about retiring early. I will also continue to do that as I go through my retirement, if you like. You know, if the market's down, particularly in a certain year, I won't take money from my pot. And I've got two things I can do to draw on money if I need to, rather than taking money from the investments. First is, again, getting some consultancy work, some part-time work, or the second is having an emergency fund. So I'll have an emergency fund of 12 to 18 months of my annual expenses in cash, or a more liquid type of fund where I can draw it and it's not linked to the stock market, so it isn't going to be impacted by those, you know, negative returns, and I will just take money from there. So again, it means that I can leave my money, I'm not drawing down the loss in my finance, my investments, because I'm using other funds. So hopefully in that time my investments have the opportunity to bounce back before I start drawing down on them, because the worst thing you can do is draw down on a fund that's already getting depleted by returns. You know, if the market's down 10% and I'm taking 4% out of there, a 14% drawdown on an account is going to empty that balance pretty quickly. So they're the kind of things that I'm going to be doing, and I think they give me the flexibility and the confidence to be far more aggressive with my withdrawal rate. The reason I want to do that as well, as I mentioned, is because I want to do this as soon as possible. I want to get out as soon as possible. I want to have the flexibility. So I've decided on a 7% withdrawal rate. So I'm going to take 7% of my money out of my fund. I'm aiming for £500,000 as my fund by the time I'm 45. Well on track for that. I'm over 80% of the way there already, so I might actually be able to do that earlier, or I might go a little bit longer depending on how things go. But that's going to give me, you know, a significant pot of money using 7%. It's almost double what the safe withdrawal rate typically is. So the £35,000 a year, nearly £3,000 a month, is going to be enough for me and my family to live on. The other thing that gives me more confidence in doing this, I will be 45. I'm not necessarily just checking out of all kind of paid work entirely. I know there's quite a lot of conflict with people saying you haven't really retired, you're still working. But really what I want to do is just have the total flexibility to pursue different passions like this. So I can start to do what I want when I want, with the safety net of having that money coming in. So that's the big reason that gives me that confidence, and that's 7%. And I've done many different models on how this works. You know, the average return of the S&P 500 is close enough to 10%. So even taking 7% with those averages, it still factors in that buffer zone for inflation. You know, if that returns 10%, I should hopefully still be making 3%. And that, with the sequence of return risk of me not taking money out when the market's down, me not retiring or starting to draw on that fund in a downturn, give me real confidence in that 7%. If anything, I think I would actually look to increase that rather than reduce it. But also I'm bridging for different things. Here in the UK, we have a private pension and we have a state pension. My private pension comes online at 57, so I'm bridging between that. So if that fund even starts to reduce in that time, that's absolutely fine with me, because I've got an injection of cash at 57, and then also my wife and I will hopefully have full state pensions at 67 or 70 or whatever age the government decide we're allowed to access that. So again, that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting moving forward. So if my pot does start to dwindle away a little bit, I'm quite comfortable with that. Again, as I mentioned to you, I don't want to, you know, die with a huge balance. I want to enjoy the money as much as possible. You know, and the book, if you haven't read it, Die with Zero, was really enlightening for me, because prior to that I was trying to make as much money as possible. I wanted to build a big war chest that I could then pass on to my kids. But now that's really changed my outlook on things. I actually want to give the money to my kids while I'm here, rather than waiting until I die and then giving them a large inheritance, for two reasons. The first one is purely selfish. And if I give them money here and I help them enjoy experiences or help them buy the first home or university, whatever that may be, I take some personal, you know, satisfaction in that, because I get to witness it, which is massive. So I'll get to see them enjoy that. But secondly, for them as well, and I'm sure anybody who's in the 40s or older, that like I am myself, they'll realise that you need money more earlier on in your life, typically. I know that's not true of everyone. Everyone's on their own journey, but typically you need money later on in life. Less. So, you know, the older you get, the less you need the money. And inheritance typically comes at 45, 50 for most people, I think that the stats were. So I want to give them money earlier. Like I said, their first car, going to university, their first home, their first big holiday with friends or family, or their significant other, weddings, whatever. There's so many different things you need money for early in life, when typically you don't have much, because most people are in probably the lowest paid jobs, the lowest they'll ever be paid. And there's very little in the way of investments to support you. So that's the reason. And I just think that 4% rule is kind of rule. You know, it's not a rule. It's written in stone for everybody. But I also think it's making people work significantly longer than what they potentially need to. So have a think about it. You know, I'm not giving this as advice. I'm just simply documenting what I'm doing. But I'm really comfortable with a much more aggressive withdrawal rate. And you know, with the things I've done to mitigate that, I'm quite confident that my balance will hopefully still grow as well. So I'm quite confident on both fronts, but I guess time will tell, and we'll see how that pans out in reality.